All right, good morning. So for my final service here in Shreveport, I wanted to talk about leading a rich life. And rich in this case is actually used in the monetary term, but we're going to dig into a little bit what it means to lead a rich life with your money and your time, but spending it on goals that are valuable to you. So a couple of weeks ago we talked about just doing it, just doing the thing that you've always been afraid of doing, that you've always wanted to do, the thing that has been something in your life that you've just not yet accomplished. And we talked a little bit about how to do that. And one of the things we talked just a bit about was setting goals, right? To start achieving whatever it is you want to achieve, you have to have a goal in mind, right? Otherwise, you're just kind of wandering about, stumbling upon things like, oh, this might be interesting. So today I want to talk a little bit more about goals and how you set them, how you can think about these goals in terms of what's valuable to you. So I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago. So the podcast is called The Art of Manliness. It's not really about manliness. It's a lot of it's about philosophy, to be honest, about living a good life, being a good human being. The guy started it particularly to be for men. And I think it's a really good podcast. He talks a lot about stoicism in particular and about living just a good life in general. So I would definitely recommend checking it out for both men and women. But one of the people he had on that he was interviewing had written a book about leading your rich life. And this author, when he was young, when he was thinking about what he wanted to be rich enough to do, he phrased it in this way: I want to be rich enough to, and in his particular case, he wanted to be able to start by being able to order appetizers with impunity. Like, I want to be able to buy appetizers whenever I want. I don't want to have to think about, can I afford appetizers, right? So it's a funny and small, but really, I think, illustrative way to think about the idea of what do I want to be rich enough to do, right? We can talk about our goals and our values and things that are important to us, but we also have to match that against the realities of the world, that we have to provide for ourselves and provide for our families. So money does factor into it, or at least resources do. And so I think it's a good way to think about, I want to be rich enough to do X, but then to really think about what X is, right? Appetizers are great, but maybe there's something a little bit deeper we can get to in the course of in our lives. So the question I want to start with is, what do you value, and where do you want to spend your time and your money? So let me give you an example. So for Jen and I, Jen's my wife, and she is an electrical engineer. So she could be making a whole bunch of money on the outside. So she's got her master's in engineering, very smart lady. That's why I married her, because she's better looking and better educated than me. And we decided the job she was in wasn't nearly as satisfying as the job that I'm in. I love my job. And we decided that we wanted to be rich enough, if I phrase it in that way, we wanted to be rich enough to be able to personally invest in our kids' development. So what does that mean? It means we have to make enough money to take care of the family, make sure we have housing and food and enough for a little bit of recreation, but we also wanted one parent to be at home. So we chose, in this case, we chose Jen, even though she was further in her career, because I like what I do and she didn't like what she did as much. And she wanted to stay home. So that's what we wanted to be rich enough to do. And people have asked her, and she was talking about this the other day, people ask her, well, why don't you go back to work? You can make so much money. That's not what I want to be. We don't need more money to do that, right? We are rich enough, right? We're not wealthy, we're not rolling in money, but we are rich enough to do the thing we want to do. So to me, it's kind of that simple. It's not easy, but it is simple in terms of thinking about it in that way. So one of the reasons that this is an important goal for us, so we both grew up fairly poor, and we both had kind of rough childhoods growing up. We came from families that had divorces and a lot of emotional issues. So we decided we wanted to provide something better for our kids. Now, we're frugal in a lot of things. Like, we don't really buy our kids much, right? So grandparents buy them stuff, We get stuff donated. We do toy swaps with other people. So we live very kind of secondhand thrifty. We buy the things that we think are important to buy and that are going to be of good quality, but we don't spend a lot in terms of what I think people have this idea of in terms of modern society of providing more for our children, right? And we've had good discussions about this. You know, I want to provide more than I had for my kids. But a lot of people think about that in terms of physical things, right? I had a crappy hand-me-down bike, or I had hand-me-down clothes, or I had hand-me-down everything, so that's okay. So they think that better in the American context means newer stuff. I can buy them new things. I can not have to, go to Walmart or wherever it is to buy things. But to me, it was more, I want to provide my kids a house where, alcohol isn't a big factor, where we don't resolve arguments by yelling at each other, where they're not being raised as effectively by the school system or the child care system or whatever it happens to be. So that's how I really thought about it, and that's where we came from. So when we sit down and have conversations about how do we spend our time and money, that's what we're focused on, is how do we create that future for our children. And so, personally, the way this manifests in my mind is that I want to be rich enough to be able to be there for my family. I don't want to have to work a job where I'm gone 80 or 100 hours a week just to be able to provide for them and provide the lifestyle, right? And that's what happens a lot. We get sucked into a lifestyle and then we have to work for the lifestyle as opposed to working for what we value. So I'll give you that as an example. So how would we get there? How would we get to being rich enough to do whatever it is we want to do? So again, it starts with a goal. So what is that goal? It could just be that I don't want to have to do yard work, right? Some people don't like yard work, and some people really like yard work. It's not that yard work is the thing, it's that does it bring value to you or not? Then there's the idea of save versus spend, right? So a lot of traditional wisdom says, you have to save, and that's true. But you also, in terms of living a rich life, something that brings you value, you have to spend money on the things that bring you value. Maybe you live farther away from your family than you'd like, and so where you want to spend your money is in travel. Or maybe what you want to do is sell the nice house and maybe the established presence you have here to be closer to your family, right? So that's spending money, but it brings you maximum value. You think about it in terms of return on investment. I'm going to invest my money in doing this thing that brings me great joy, as opposed to the stuff that I have that doesn't maybe bring me as much joy. One of the things that this author talked about was where you get your advice from. So a lot of people who don't have money are getting advice from people who also don't have money, who are also not rich enough to do the things they want to do. So the way I think about this is the crabs in the bucket advice, right? People are going to say, well, you're never going to get rich because whatever, or no, just put all your money in the mattress because, the whoever's out to get us, right? And a lot of times they're if you've never heard of the crabs in a bucket analogy, right? Crabs trying to climb out of a bucket will pull other crabs down, right? So the idea then is to maybe seek out some advice from people who are living the kind of life that you want to live, right? And again, it's not about stuff, it's not about money, it's about value. And then here's another piece that I think is really important for people to realize in terms of money. Making money versus saving money. When you start with your goal, I want to be rich enough to do X, unless you're already making a decent amount, you can't save your way to getting there. You've got to make your way to getting there. And that might be through investments, that might be through a different kind of job. It might be that what you do is what you want to do. And it's not about the money, and it's about what the job is, right? But it's all about having that goal in mind first and then figuring out how much do I have to make to get there. Savings is definitely a piece of that. But you have to make the money to get where you want to be, right? And again, this is not about making a bunch of money. Right? I know many people in this room that make enough money to take care of themselves and do exactly what they want to do. And they do that by being frugal, but they still get to do what they want, and that's important. So another way he talked about this is money dials, right? You can dial some things up, dial some things down, and about being frugal in the places where you're not getting a lot of value, right? Some people really love their coffee, right? They like the daily ritual of getting the coffee. So that for them is a money dial. And that's where they want to spend some of their money. And as long as they're good with the relation of that dial to other dials that they have, whether it's family or development or whatever it happens to be, then that's good. But let's say you're spending money on cable. This is one for us. So we don't really like cable and having it, and it's very expensive. So our cable dial is 0. And that allows us to spend money elsewhere in places that we would like. So think about those money dials for you. What does that look like? What are things that you do, and where could you maybe dial some down so you could dial the ones up that really bring you value? It's an interesting way to think about it. Another thing is location, job, and then culture. And then part of that is childcare. Childcare is really expensive. I was having a conversation with someone earlier this week. There are families that work basically to keep their kids in childcare. Because when you look at how much one of the people makes, it's barely above what they pay for childcare. You're maybe making $1,000 or $2,000 extra dollars a year. Think about the cost in terms of time and connection with family. Because there's this idea that both parents have to work, right? Everybody in America has to be working or you're not bringing value. And there's this huge stigma still against staying home and watching the kids, which to me is absolutely insane. You know, people may think about it in terms like, because I'm the one working in a job that receives a salary, I'm making the money. I am not making the money. Jen's making the money because she's developing our children into responsible human beings. That it's one, much harder, and two, much more valuable when you think about the overall impact in the world. Because they have their whole lives ahead of them, and ours are, we're a third or halfway through, who knows. So to me, when we think about this idea that, both people have to work, so we have to make more money. Make more money for what? Make more money so that we can go on vacations with our kids. It's like, well, you could be vacationing with your kids all the time by having camping trips, or you're just going out in the yard or doing whatever. So it's a different way to think about what it is that's valuable to you and where you're spending that money. The other one that I was talking about were locations and jobs. Right? You might be in a place where you have a great job that makes good money, but the location is so terribly expensive that it offsets all the gains that you're getting. So I think it's really important to be smart about where you're working, what you're doing. Do those things bring you value? And then how does that contribute to your overall goal? As I mentioned earlier, if you're living far away from family and that's the thing that's valuable to you, you're making all this money and then spending it all traveling, well, maybe it would be better just to live closer to that family, right? You might take a pay cut, but as long as it's enough, as long as you're rich enough to do the thing that you want to do, which in this case is be with your family, then it's enough. And the last piece on how we get there is, to me, how we think about time versus money. I know that when I started in my current career out of college, I started making enough that to me, especially from how I grew up, it was enough money to live on. It was enough money for me to have a family and have kids. I could have taken care of them. We would not have had a lot left over, but it would have been enough. And ever since then, I've gotten raises and such, so we have way more than enough than we need to do the thing we want to do, which is to have that family. So at this point, I don't need to make more money. But as I progress, my time becomes more, there are more demands on my time. So instead of figuring out how do I just make more money or work harder or do whatever, I figure out how to spend my money to create more time. So when I go back to yard work, I could do yard work. I could get a mower and I could maintain all the equipment and I could go, trim up everything. Or I could pay somebody way less than my time is worth per hour. And I think it's really important for people to set a per hour amount. Right now, my time with my kids is worth $200 an hour. That might seem like a lot, but there's not a lot that I do that I need, work on my car maybe. So if something is less than $200 an hour to pay somebody else to do, I will have them do that. Because my time with my kids is valuable and I don't have a lot of extra time outside of work. So I make sure I'm dedicated to that. So I think it's really important to think about your time versus your money and put dollar amounts on that. You can think about it in terms of whatever you make in your hourly wage or your salary in terms of per hour cost. And then think about your free time being worth that much time, because you work to have that free time. So if you're spending a lot of free time doing stuff, for instance, being on the phone with an internet company for 3 hours, because that happened to me this weekend, right? So that to me gives me an argument to go and say, look, I'm working for you at this point, so let's make a deal. But that's what I think about when I think about spending my time. I think about it as spending, like you would spend your money. You should budget your time like you budget your money. My time is worth this much. You know, if it's time with your kids, to me, it's worth even more. Right? If someone's going to cut in on that time, it had better be worth it. So that's really important. So to wrap it up, what do we need to do? What's the call to action for this? First, set your goals. This is where you should spend the most of your time in this whole process. Really think about what brings value to your life. And then you have to periodically reevaluate it. And I think one of the best lenses to use to reevaluate that is the time versus money. Where's my time being spent versus where's the money that I'm making to then offset that time? Hey, come on in. Because you can always make more money, right? And this is the thing that I think is difficult for people to think about. You can always make more money. You cannot make more time. You can only use money to offset where you would spend your time. So then from that point, you figure out what you have to make. Maybe you have to get a second job, or maybe both spouses have to work, but maybe not. Maybe to live your rich life, staying at home is the thing that you need to do, and that's where you spend your time versus spending your money. And then here's the question, another question that I think will really help you put this all into one view so you can see it. At the end of your life, think about what you wish you had done more of. Where do you wish you had spent more time? What do you wish you had done? And what's the legacy you want to leave behind? And then think about what are you going to do today to make that a reality so you don't have to make that wish at the end of your life. So with that, thank you all very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to serve you since I've been here. I look forward to seeing what you do going forward, and have a wonderful week and life. Thank you.